In many scenarios, you may want to capture the user input and store it in some sort of memory so that they don't have to re-enter this information every time they come back to your application again. So what I mean by that is, let's say I typed in my name here and I selected the difficulty of medium. Now, every time, even though I did save the preferences, obviously we did not save it yet, but now every time I come back to the application or even reload this page, all of this information goes away. And that could be kind of detrimental to the user experience of your application. So what we're going to talk about in this video is how we can capture this input, store it in some sort of memory in the browser. So even if I do close my browser altogether and come back to it, my information can still be restored from that memory. This brings us to another web API that is available to us through the browsers. Again, they're not part of the core JavaScript functionalities or language, but they are browser APIs that are exposed to JavaScript here. So what I'm gonna do, I'll switch over to my script.js, and in my submit event listener, I am gonna try to store this information in what we call the local storage. Now, over here, we'll do local storage dot set item. This here takes two arguments. The first is the key, what is the name of the thing that you're trying to store, and then the second is obviously the value. So over here we'll do the key is going to be player name, and the value is going to be whatever the username is. We'll do the same thing as well for the difficulty, and we'll store the difficulty value here. Now if I save this and then we come back here and I type in a name and select the difficulty of medium, if I save my preferences, technically we did store the data, but now even if I reload the page, everything goes away. But let me show you where this data is stored first. If you go into your developer tools, you can expand this and go into the application section, and in here you'll see there's a number of storage that is available to you through the browser. The one that we just used right now was the local storage. So if I click on that, I'll make sure that this is the application that we're running right now. This is localhost 5500. If I click on that, we'll see that we do have two values stored in memory here. We did store player name with the value of Yahya and the difficulty with the value of medium. Now the next challenge would be, how do we get this value back from the local storage and populate it on our form when we load our application? Let's create a value or a variable for the saved name, which will be the value of local storage dot get item, and over here we need to provide just the key. So if I want to capture the player name into this variable, we'll do that, and then the same thing for the saved difficulty, and we'll get the difficulty here. Now technically I have these two values stored in the variable right now. The next thing I need to do is to update that into the system. So if I do player name.input, I do want you to update the value to whatever the saved name is. Same thing goes for the difficulty input, where I want to update the value for it with the saved difficulty. Now if I save that, as I refresh my application, you see that the information is being restored and updated onto my form as well. Now this works because we actually have our script loaded all the way at the end of the body section here. But let's think about, what if the script was actually somewhere in the head, or was defined earlier on in the HTML file here. Now technically, if I look into the console, we'll see some errors here. It says there is an error on line 10, which is us trying to update the value of our player name input. It's trying to say that I'm trying to set the property of something that is null. So it basically says there is no such thing as a player name input, even though we do know that we have it, right? We did create it in our index.html here, right there. But for whatever reason, our JavaScript does not see it. Now, the reason for that is because the browsers are loading the information onto your screen in the order that they show up in the HTML file. So over here, the browser was trying to load the script, even though at that time, none of these things existed, right? None of these were actually in our code just yet. That's why we generally like to put the script at the end of the body. That way, the entire page has loaded before we're trying to execute any interactivity or any JavaScript code. But even if we do want to keep it in the head over here, we can do some fixes for that. So over here, I'm gonna capture the window and I'm gonna add an event listener on the entire window. And the event that we're looking for here is the DOM content loaded. So we're basically gonna say, we do want you to wait until the entire DOM has loaded before you try to do any of this stuff right here. We're also gonna need to go back to our index.html and make sure that we add a property called defer. And what that basically does, as the tooltip here explains, is that it's a Boolean attribute that basically prevents your DOM content loaded event from firing until the script has loaded and the entire page has been set. So now if I save this, we should not get this error now. And you see that our values are populated again. All right, so what if I do actually want to be able to reset those values as well? Now I'm going to go back into my form and let's create another button. It's going to be of type button this time because that's not what's going to trigger the submit function. And we'll call this reset. Now I've already configured in my style.css here some styling that will, if I add the class danger, it will make my button look red instead. So I'll just go ahead and add that class. Looks like this, remove the type. So let's put it back. And if I hit save, now we see my reset button has kind of different styling. All right, let's give that also an ID. Reset button. And I'll switch back to my JavaScript file and capture this reset button equal document get element by ID, where this is our reset button. Now we'll create another event listener for the reset button. On add event listener, and on click we want you to trigger the following being local storage dot remove item, and in this case let's remove the player name, and we could also remove the difficulty. If I save that, let's actually open the application tab one more time, look at the storage, reload, and make sure that everything is there. If I hit the reset button, you notice how everything just cleared out of memory. And if I reload my application or refresh, nothing is loaded here. You also notice here how the difficulty field became empty, even though we still have the options. That is because we have set our event listener here to set the value for the difficulty input to whatever the saved difficulty value is, which in our case is empty. So what we actually need to do to clean that behavior up a little bit is we add an if statement. If there is a saved difficulty, then we want you to do that. Otherwise, just use or fall back to the normal behavior. So if we save that now, it falls back to the normal behavior where it would show you the first option in the list. And now if we type in another name here and save the preferences, here we go. We capture the difficulty and the name. If I update the preferences, we are updating that here as well. Now, if you're using the local storage to store a bunch of other things, this might be kind of inefficient where you're going to have to rename them or name them one by one. But we do also have another function that we could use, or another method that we could use, called clear, which will basically clear out the local storage altogether. So regardless of how many items you might have in there, this now should clear all the properties that you have in the local storage. Now, just remember that the local storage here does not require any server. This is all happening on the browser for the user. So if they even close this and open it in a different browser, none of this information will be loaded there because it's not something that you are sending from a server. It is something that is being stored in this local instance of this particular browser. If I open a different browser, again, this information would not be there.